Hello, E-Life leaders. It's a beautiful Saturday. How do you do? Even as we try to imagine and also look forward for the new normal of a way of living, especially city life, we want to know what things we need to sacrifice, or things that we need to pursue, or things that we need to set aside, or new things that we should turn down. We will like some of them, we won't others. We may try to force the situation, or the situation may force us to adjust. Today I will be sharing with you a very short story from 2 Kings chapter 8, wherein it was best to leave town at the risk of losing everything left behind. 5 Saturdays ago, I shared with you how God preserves the faithful. A short survey of what adjustments some of the people of God had to make and what God did to make sure that they would survive, instead of immediately stopping the disaster. In this story, we will study, we hope to learn how to adjust and to trust God in times of difficulties, when God Himself brings the disaster to the land. Let us read 2 Kings chapter 8 verses 1 to 6. Now Elisha had said to the woman whose son he had restored to life, "Arise and depart with your household, and sojourn wherever you can, for the Lord has called for a famine, and it will come upon the land for 7 years." So the woman arose and did according to the word of the man of God. She went with her household and sojourned in the land of the Philistines 7 years. And at the end of the 7 years, when the woman returned from the land of the Philistines, she went to appeal to the king for her house and her land. Now the king was talking with Gehazi, the servant of the man of God, saying, "Tell me all the great things that Elisha has done." While he was telling the king how Elisha had restored the dead to life, behold, the woman whose son he had restored to life appealed to the king for her house and her land. And Gehazi said, "My lord, O king, here is the woman, and here is her son, whose Elisha restored to life." And when the king asked the woman, she told him. So the king appointed an official for her, saying, "Restore all that was hers, together with all the produce of the fields, from the day that she left the land until now." I will be drawing 4 lessons from the story and see how we can apply them in our current situation. The first one, adjustment. Leave when God says so. Leave when God says so. Because this is a way of God for us to survive. Again, verses 1 and 2. Now Elisha had said to the woman whose son he had restored to life, "Arise and depart with your household, and sojourn wherever you can, for the Lord has called for a famine, and it will come upon the land for 7 years." It's a blessed thing to receive a direct instruction from the Lord through a man of God, Elisha. Certainly, this is a unique case. We do not have that luxury of having a prophet like Elisha to tell us directly what to do. So why did Elisha tell her to depart? Obviously, the land is not the place for her to survive because of a famine. Now, let us try to know the woman first. In verse 1, we learned that the Lord already did a miracle for her by raising up her dead son. Let's look at chapter 4, verse 32. When Elisha came into the house, he saw the child lying dead on his bed. So he went in and shut the door behind the two of them and prayed to the Lord. Then he went up and lay on the child, putting his mouth on his mouth, his eyes on his eyes, and his hand on his hands. And as he stretched upon him, the flesh of the child became warm. Then he got up again and walked once back and forth in the house, and went up and stretched himself upon him. The child sneezed 7 times, and the child opened his eyes. What an amazing story. She has seen and experienced the mighty hand of God for having her son get back to life. In fact, for her, having that son was a miracle. Let's move back in chapter 4, verses 14 and 17. And Elisha said, "What then is to be done for her?" That's the Shunammite woman. Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, Gehazi answered, "Well, she has no son, and her husband is old." But the woman conceived, and she bore a son about the time the following spring, as Elisha had said to her. She was very blessed to have a son. When, for whatever reason, they could not bear one until the husband got old and until they met Elisha. Why was Elisha giving her a favor? Well, it was a way to thank her for her support. Again, let's step back a few verses. In verse 8, one day Elisha went to Shunem, where a wealthy woman lived, who urged her to eat some food. So whenever he passed that way, he would turn in there to eat food. And she said to her husband, "Behold, I know that this is a holy man of God who is continually passing our way. Let us make a small room on the roof with walls and put there for him a bed, a table, a chair, and a lamp, so that whenever he comes to us, he can go in there." Wow, the Shunammite woman was actually wealthy. She also loved the Lord. She was very hospitable. She served Elisha, the man of God. Nobody told her that, but she did whatever she could do to serve the servant of God. Let's go back to the story about the instruction to leave the land and go to somewhere else. It was probably very difficult for the Shunammite woman to leave town because she'd be leaving her land. She probably experienced some losses already due to the famine. Nevertheless, she believed Elisha. She trusted the Lord. She understood that the Lord had sent the famine, and she could do nothing about it. Denying or resisting the Lord's instruction would lead to her destruction. As a wealthy woman, I guess she knew that leaving town was the best decision for her. While some people were in denial, that is, they could not accept that the famine was heaven sent, the Shunammite woman readily accepted the word of the Lord to leave town. It was grace from the Lord. There's nothing wrong with becoming an economic refugee. It may be difficult. It is truly difficult. But she did not ignore the second part of the message. The famine was temporary. She got an exact figure, 7 years. Therefore, the adjustment she needed to make was only for 7 years. This is very long, but not lifelong. Our grandparents, or maybe for some of us, our great-grandparents, endured the Japanese occupation for 3 years. Now, that was about 75 to 78 years ago. But in the end, the famine in Israel was scheduled to end. But it ended. The famine in Israel was scheduled to end too. That was the right amount of time for God to accomplish His purposes in Israel, to discipline the nation, to get them back to Him. Be flexible. Learn to adjust. Do not ignore the word of the Lord. Obey Him and trust Him. Leave when God says so. Letter B. Live under God's protection. Now, we cannot assume that everyone has to leave. We do not know if Elisha told some others to leave. It is very unlikely that he told everybody to leave. Verse 2. So the woman arose and did according to the word of the man of God. She went with her household and sojourned in the land of the Philistines 7 years. The way God preserved the Shunammite woman was for her to leave. That must be very difficult. Obedience becomes hard when we love more our place of comfort than the one who can bless us wherever He wants us to go. So now imagine the family leaving the place. Planning to move out is a sad and painful experience because the place you are leaving will only become a memory. And moving out and traveling with what you have remaining is also difficult, dangerous, and tiring. So now let's imagine the family has just arrived in Philistia. Arriving at your destiny may be a little consoling, but things are just getting started. Many times, you get emotional because you become homesick. But to the Shunammite woman, she needed to be very strong, especially that she was the leader because her husband was very old. And now begin to imagine how they presented themselves to the Philistines, finding their place in a foreign land and convincing the people that they were harmless, they were not enemies. It was quite a challenge. Settling down in a new place and organizing everybody demands much wisdom and takes much effort. Now, we do not know if she worked for someone or she tried to start a business. Either way, starting is very difficult. Starting all over again is not easy. As to why seek refuge in the land of the Philistines, who were the enemies of Israel for centuries, I don't know why there. But remember, David, before he became a king, also sought refuge among the Philistines, 1 Samuel chapter 27. And the Lord sustained him there. In the same way, God can preserve us even in the place of danger. Why? Because He is our security, our protection, our shelter, and our shield. When God instructs, obey. Where God leads, go. Where you go, God will preserve you. Some of us love traveling but not migrating. Some of us have been desperate to migrate and never come back. Some of us have migrated but are desperate to come back home. In the case of the Shunammite woman and her family, this is a temporary setback. It is for their good. It's just a phase in life, not a permanent turning away from her homeland. What can we learn in a life of a sojourn? 1. Adjust from a life of a local to a life of a foreigner. As a wealthy woman, she probably was used to having control over her household and her business. In chapter 4, verse 18, they were reaping a harvest. And that's the time that her son died. Maybe she was in an agriculture business. Now, as a refugee in Philistia, she needed to learn how to live peaceably with the locals and how to look for work or get some source of income, whether that's work or business. How to adjust to the bad side of the Philistines, how to appreciate the good side. The point is, her plan and work must only be short term. 7 years is short for business, even nowadays where life changes so fast. To a lazy and impatient person, 7 years are very long and dragging. Number 2, trust God that He will protect us when we are foreigners in another land. The Philistines must have received many refugees from Israel. Maybe they took advantage of them. They got huge workforce that would be willing to do the hard and meager work for them. Maybe they took huge profit from business people like her. Instead of refusing refugees or destroying them as they come, they might have seen it as an advantage to them. But from the Shunamites' perspective, it's all about trusting God. Now, she may have prayed, God, you have brought us here to survive. Our ancestors did the same. You didn't forsake them. When Abram came out of Egypt, Genesis 12, verse 6, 13:2. When Yitzhak came out of Gerar in Philistia, Genesis 26, 12 to 16. When Yaakov came out of Haran, Genesis 31, 15 to 18. They went out richer than the locals. You will also sustain us here in Philistia. We will leave this place in your time. We will go home not empty-handed. When you trust God, you will return to your land with many blessings. So live under God's protection. Letter C. Return to God's land. Verse 3. And at the end of the 7 years, when the woman returned from the land of the Philistines, she went to appeal to the king for her house and her land. 7 years in Philistia was no regret. She and her family behaved well there. They may have experienced some discrimination, but they made it through. They learned so much from there, especially survival and humility and trusting in the Lord. They were grateful to the Lord for their time there. But there is no place like home. After 7 years, she must have been very excited to come back to her homeland, but she knew the timing of the Lord. Now, during the 7 years of stay there, she must have continuously encouraged her family to keep up in their faith in the Lord, that He will bring them back to Shunem. As she focused on being productive while staying in Philistia, she did not lose her sight on the future return to her beloved land. She has experienced the mighty hand of God through Elisha when he restored her son back to life. She was confident that she would be back in her land. So now, let's imagine how they prepared for their departure from Philistia. Now, they may have made a very good impact on the people. They may have had friends there. Their departure from Philistia may have been bittersweet. But it is time for them to go back home. Now, the things that I'm saying here are just imagination, the ideal scenario for the Shunammite family. We are not sure what actually happened there. The writer of 2 Kings was not interested what happened there, but that they only made back to Shunem. But the reason why I am making up this story is to encourage you at the present time that as we go through extended quarantine, to make this experience a positive and energizing one. As the Shunammite family made it through in Philistia, we can also make it through this pandemic and whatever the new normal would be. If we are adjustable and if we keep trusting the Lord, then no bad situation should break us down. Let us be patient, resilient, willing to adjust, and be overcomers. It's hard to get along with people who keep on ranting about the bad things in life. I hope that's not you, but you gotta find out whether that complainer is you. Now, you better look around you. Are people complaining about your attitude? You gotta be like the Shunammite woman. Hard times do come. Famines happen. But you gotta keep control of yourself during these bad times. You see, El Nido is getting weaker here in the Philippines. Water supply is stable. We gotta learn how to live and adjust in the changing conditions of this planet that the Lord has placed us. The Lord has never abandoned us. In this part of the story, the Shunammite family was glad that the famine was over in the land of Israel. There was still uncertainty if they could travel safely, and when they arrived there, if they could have their land back. But the fact is, they made it through back to Shunem, and it's something to be very grateful. She knew that God has great things in store for them. In the same way, God has great things for us after this pandemic. Now, they were back to Israel with a new normal. We will also bounce back with a new normal. Return to God's land in the proper time. Letter D. Recover what God has reserved or preserved for you. Now the king was talking with Gehazi, the servant of the man of God, saying, "Tell me all the great things that Elisha has done." And while he was telling the king how Elisha had restored the dead to life, behold, the woman whose son he had restored to life appealed to the king for her house and her land. And Gehazi said, "My lord, O king, here is the woman, and here is her son whom Elisha restored to life." What a perfect timing! Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, was just right before the king of Israel, testifying of the great things that the Lord has done through the ministry of Elisha. He was an eyewitness to the restoration of the life of the Shunammite son, chapter 4, verse 36. Then suddenly, the Shunammite woman with her son, with whom he was talking about, appeared before them. Do you see how God works all things for those who love him and who are called according to his purpose? Romans chapter 8, verse 28. Because Gehazi was testifying about Elisha, about her, and about her son, it was the perfect time to make a request to the king. And when the king asked the woman, she told him. So the king appointed an official for her, saying, "Restore all that was hers, together with all the produce of the fields, from the day that she left the land until now." Wow, that was very easy, way too easy, very convenient. See, the king was so blessed with that testimony. The king was grateful that the famine had ended, He was happy to see how God preserved the Shunammite woman and her family in Philistia. He was also more than happy to be a part of the beautiful story of her and her family. So that's why he didn't hesitate to restore everything to her. Restore all that was hers, together with all the produce of the fields, from the day that she left the land until now. All this time, God has been protecting her property in Shunem, not just her family, while they were still in Philistia. Wow! Somebody took care of her land for her. Now, it had some produce, and she would get to enjoy them. How amazing is the work of God! How wonderful is His plan! How great is His hand that preserves! Blessed be the Lord God of Israel. If you trust the Lord with all your heart, He will keep you and sustain you. He will give you more blessings that you can ever imagine. Whatever you may have lost before, He will restore to you more than before. So let's recap. Leave when God says so. Live under God's protection. Return to God's land. Recover what God has reserved or preserved for you. Leave, live, return, and recover. Allow me to end by reading this beautiful part of Psalm 37, starting from verse 23. The steps of a man are established by the Lord when he delights in his way. Though he fall, he shall not be cast headlong, for the Lord upholds his hands. I have been young, and now I am old, yet I have not seen the righteous forsaken, or his children begging for bread. He is ever lending generously, and his children become a blessing. Turn away from evil and do good, so shall you dwell forever. For the Lord loves justice. He will not forsake his saints. They are preserved forever, but the children of the wicked shall be cut off. The righteous shall inherit the land and dwell upon it forever. The mouth of the righteous utters wisdom, and his tongue speaks justice. The law of his God is in his heart. His steps do not slip. The wicked watches for the righteous and seeks to put him to death. The Lord will not abandon him to his power, or to let him be condemned when he is brought to trial. Wait for the Lord and keep his way, and he will exalt you to inherit the land. You will look on when the wicked are cut off. Thank you for joining me. Like and share our videos, like our Facebook page, eLife Leadership Forum, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'll see you on Wednesday.